Is November 6, 2012, and I'm interviewing veteran specialist Kyle Johnson.
Sorry. You start that again. For whatever reason, it kicked out in the standby.
Absolutely.
From the top. It's okay.
Hello, my name is Brenna Wormers with the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project. Today's date is November 6, 2012, and I'm interviewing veteran specialist Kyle Johnson at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, about his life and military service. So I would just like to start off saying, where and when were you born?
I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, August 9th, 1984.
And where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the Indy area?
No, I grew up in Muncie, actually.
And what was that like for you?
Pretty good. Just small town kind of living, so you got used to it.
Did you have any siblings?
I have one full-blooded sister. I have a half-sister, a half-brother, and 3 stepbrothers.
Oh my gosh, so big blended
Yeah.
family. And so your parents got divorced at some point?
Yes.
And how old were you when that happened?
8.
How did you feel when that happened?
Nothing, really. It never really affected me.
How would you describe yourself as a child?
Rambunctious, quiet.
How do those two fit together?
I would run around a lot, but I didn't talk a whole lot.
What was your favorite thing to do?
To do? Be outside.
What kind of activities did you do outside?
Play sports, normal little kid type stuff.
So were you involved in sports when you were younger?
Yes.
Which sports?
When I was really young, I played baseball, and then in like middle school through high school, I played soccer.
Were there any other activities that you participated in as a child, or just mainly sports?
Just mainly sports.
Was anyone else in your family in the military?
My granddad was in. He was an infantryman in World War II.
Did you talk to him a lot about that growing up?
No, he didn't talk about it a lot until after I was already in the military.
Oh, wow. And where did you go to high school?
Heritage Hall Christian School here in Muncie.
And what was high school like for you?
I didn't like it.
Why not?
Mainly the type of people that I was around. I didn't really mesh well.
What kind of people were you around, and why didn't you mesh?
It was a strict evangelical Baptist school, so their rules and regulations and their style of living kind of like juxtaposed against mine.
And how did you end up at Heritage Hall then?
My parents decided it was a better education opportunity for me.
Did you have a favorite subject while you were there?
History.
What drew you to that?
I'm not sure, actually. I just enjoyed it. Just enjoyed learning about the different cultures and different historical type stuff. So,
And would you mind reiterating which sports you were involved in when you were in high school?
when I was in high school, I played soccer, golf, and basketball.
So you were really active all the time.
Yes.
Did you have a lot of friends due to that?
Yes.
And what was your best memory of being involved in sports in high school?
My soccer team won the state championship my junior year.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What did that feel like when your team accomplished that?
Awesome.
And then during your high school career, the 9/11 attacks happened. What were you doing that day, and when did you find out?
We were in class, and they called us all into the auditorium and told us about it.
What was your initial reaction,
I didn't believe it
and why didn't you believe it?
because it just seemed like something so totally out of the norm that it was just hard to swallow at first, I guess.
Did your reaction to the 9/11 attacks have any impact on you joining the military?
No.
Not at all.
Nope.
Immediately following high school, what did you do?
I went to Ball State.
Ball State University?
Yes.
And what made you choose Ball State as a college?
It was close enough to home that I could go home when I wanted, but far enough away that I wouldn't have to worry about like my folks stopping by all the time, I guess.
And what did you study?
I studied history here.
And what aspect of the field most interested you?
Middle Eastern history.
Really, why?
Just the culture and like the way they acted and the way how they think and what they accomplished.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Arab nation, like the Ottoman Empire, stretched from all the way from Saudi Arabia up into Spain for a long time, almost into France. So to be able to accomplish a feat like that, up in and through northern Africa, so.
You attended Ball State, but you did not graduate Ball State. What were the dates of your attendance here at Ball State?
I was from 2003 until 2006.
And in your pre-interview, you mentioned that you got tired of college.
Yes.
What made you leave school? Or decide?
I had completed all the requirements for my major and as well as all my general classes, and so I just needed credits to graduate, and I didn't. I still think it was kind of stupid to take a whole lot of classes on subjects that I really didn't care about.
And what were you planning to do when you left school?
When I left school?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I graduated?
No, when you decided to leave.
Oh, I left
Ball
school
State.
because I joined the Army.
Oh, you left school. Because you had mentioned something about your interest in the Peace Corps.
Oh, yeah, that was my initial thought
Mm-hmm.
before, and then when I was talking to a buddy of mine, I was like, hey, I'm going to get out of here. And I was thinking about joining the Peace Corps. He goes, why don't you just join the Army instead? And I was like, all right.
Was that all it took to get you?
Well, I had been thinking about it, and that just was like, yeah, that's a good idea.
And you entered the war, or you entered the armed forces during active wartime. What was that like?
They really didn't iterate it at the time because I did basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So at that time, there were no deploying units out of Fort Knox. It was just a training and doctrine command. So we had combat vets as drill sergeants, but other than that, it wasn't really a factor.
And what was your family's reaction when you told them you were leaving school?
When I was leaving school, they didn't really have a reaction. I think because I didn't tell my mom I had joined the Army because I got a phone. My mom, I guess she found out somehow. I'm not really sure how, but she called me. And was like, "Did you join the Army?" And I was like, "Yep. I leave for basic training in 2 weeks."
And what was their reaction to you joining the Army?
They were like, I don't know if they agreed with it, but they were okay with it, I guess you'd say. They really didn't have much to say.
How did it make you feel, the fact that they didn't have that much to say?
I really didn't care one way or another.
How did you prepare to leave for Fort Knox for basic training?
I didn't.
What do you mean?
I went to the recruiter. I signed all the paperwork. I went to, it's called MEPS, Military Entry Processing Station. I went to MEPS, the physical, and I waited for my basic date to come along. I went back to MEPS, and I got in a van, and we drove to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
What were your expectations of basic training? Did you have any?
I didn't have any.
The Army has a strict no tobacco policy.
No, they don't.
During basic training?
During basic training, yeah, they do.
Did you smoke or chew tobacco prior to basic training?
I smoked prior to basic training.
How did you deal with having to give up your habit for basic?
I was so busy all the time that we were all so busy all the time that you really don't think about it.
Did you ever get a spare second to think about it?
Nope.
Could you describe your experience with the reception battalion?
It wasn't really, it was more like reception was more like, all right, here's where you're going to sleep. And then they came and woke you up and they're like, this is what you're doing today. And so we went and got our uniforms one day we went and got our gear, like the stuff we needed for basic training the next day, and we learned like basic marching fundamentals, but other than that, they really didn't have a whole lot to do with us.
How was your first interaction with your drill sergeants?
They marched us onto a field, they dumped all our bags out, searched through everything, took our cell phones, and then told us we had 5 seconds to get into our rooms.
What were your drill sergeants like?
Stereotypical. They were good guys.
Could you describe what you mean when you say stereotypical?
Like, I don't know. The closest, like, the reference, like the Full Metal Jacket reference to the drill sergeant, and that is pretty good.
Now, you said that they were good guys.
They were.
Did you respect them?
Oh, yeah.
What qualities made them good leaders?
They were competent. They definitely knew their stuff, and they knew how to present it well, and they knew how to make sure that you understood it and how to do everything. And they just made sure that we were prepared to go to our units.
Could you walk me through a typical day at Basic?
It changed day to day, but I guess the normal day is we get up and we do PT at 06, and then for an hour, and then we'd come back in. We'd have time to shower and shave, and then we change into our duty uniform, our ACUs, and then we would do whatever was planned, whatever training event was planned for that day, whether it be basic rifle marksmanship or fundamentals of reconnaissance or something along those lines. And then, man, you'd have meals mixed in there too. And then we'd be out there all day, and then we'd come back and it was lights out by 9 o'clock.
And every recruit that goes through basic training has to go through the gas chamber.
Yes.
Could you describe that experience?
Not fun. They march us in, and you have your gas mask on when you go in, and then they'll tell you to break the seal on your gas mask, which basically means you take it off. And then they have you do something. They have you say something, like they have you either like sing a song or say your name or something, and then or they do jumping jacks or whatever, and then they'll tell you to reseal your mask, put your mask back on, and then they march you out.
What was going through your mind when you were in there?
I can't breathe.
And what did the gas feel like?
Sand. It felt like you were breathing sand.
And I recently read an article that claimed the most painful aspect of the gas chamber exercise is the anticipation of the exercise itself.
Probably.
Do you agree with this?
Yeah.
Why?
Because once you're in there and you actually do it, and then you come out, you're fine. It's not that bad.
And the first time that you held your M16, your rifle, what was that like?
Awesome. It was completely different. Like I hadn't had a lot of experience with weapons before that, so having them show us how to do it and teach us how to do it and all that was pretty cool.
What was it like the first time that you fired it?
Stressful.
Had you ever fired a gun before?
Yes.
What was it, a different experience knowing that you were in the Army and knowing what the rifle was for?
No. You don't really have time to think or process that stuff through. They're like, you have to get this done. You have to do it now. You have to get it right.
During basic training, did you have a battle buddy? Or battle buddies?
We had a platoon.
How did you get along with your platoon?
Pretty well. I mean, as well as you can for 16 weeks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, living with the same people. I mean, there's sure to be arguments and fights and stuff like that, but overall it was pretty good.
How important was the connection with your platoon for you getting through basic training?
Very important.
What was communication like with your family back home during basic training?
Written letters. That was it.
Did you receive a lot of correspondence back and forth?
Yeah.
And how did you feel every time you got a letter?
Pretty good.
Why?
Because it was like my connection with the outside world, everything that's going on.
Did you feel cut off from the outside world during basic?
That's kind of the point.
Can you describe what that felt like?
Just kind of imagine like spending all your time on campus, like here at Ball State, spending all your time on campus, you're not able to leave, and you really don't have any knowledge of what's going on outside of that area.
And did you ever get a chance to relax during basic training?
Thanksgiving?
You got Thanksgiving off?
Yes.
Did you have the opportunity to come home?
No.
Was your family able to come and visit you, or?
After basic training, you do 9 weeks of basic training, and then you do 7 weeks of advanced individual training. So between the 9 weeks and the 7-week period, we had a weekend where our families came up and we were able to see.
So on Thanksgiving, when you did have a break, what did you do that day?
Sleep.
And what's your fondest memory of basic training?
Graduation.
Why?
Because I could leave.
What was the worst part?
Sleep deprivation.
They deprived you of sleep?
They had ways of going about it, but yeah.
What were their ways?
You'd have to pull something called fire guard, which normally is 2 men for an hour each throughout the night, but they could make it so they could make it up to platoon or up to squad sizes of 4 guys on fire guard. So you were rotating like every 3 hours, every 4 hours or so. So you'd get some sleep, then you'd wake up and you'd have to pull an hour of fire guard, and then you go back to sleep and get up, back to pull fire guard.
So after graduation, which is the best part for you, how did it feel knowing that you were officially a soldier now?
Really, really good. Like, yeah, it was an accomplishment.
Is that one of the proudest accomplishments in your life, would you say?
Yes.
And right after you left basic training, what was the first thing that you did during that weekend off?
First thing I did, I ate at a restaurant and
What'd
had
you
normal
eat?
food.
What did you eat?
I don't remember.
Do you remember which restaurant it was?
No. And I put normal clothes on. Felt good.
Yeah. What exactly did you have to wear every day during basic?
You were either in your PT uniform, which is shorts and a t-shirt, or sweats and a sweatshirt, or you were in ACUs, which is the camouflage.
So when you put on regular clothes again, how did it feel knowing that you were now a soldier who was putting on civilian clothes?
Great. I was so tired of wearing them after that. So.
Did you find that basic training changed you in any way?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate?
I was definitely more confident. You definitely learned leadership skills there. So.
What kind of leadership skills?
How to lead men, basically, knowing what to do and when to do it and how to do it and stuff like that. So.
And you had a weekend between your AIT or your basic training and your AIT.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your official military occupational specialty?
I am a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout.
Could you describe the duties of that MOS?
And when we're used in our normal function, we're used for reconnaissance and security, which is we go out and find the enemy, and then we report back to the infantry who comes in and takes care of it. Or we'll call in field artillery.
And how did you choose your MOS?
I wanted a combat MOS, and I didn't want to be an infantryman.
And why did you want a combat MOS?
because they were the ones who got to see action.
And what drew you to wanting to see action?
My personality.
Could you...
I couldn't see myself sitting behind a desk or see myself working through paperwork or anything like that. I'd rather be out in the field doing something.
And when and where did you do your advanced infantry training for your 19 Delta Cavalry Scout?
Fort Knox.
And how long was your AIT?
7 weeks.
Could you walk me through what you learned in AIT?
We learned basic fundamentals of reconnaissance. We learned more, we learned advanced, better tactics. We learned more tactics, I guess you'd say.
What kind of tactics?
Movement. How to move under fire and stuff like that.
And was that different from tactics that you've been taught in basic training?
Yeah, because we actually knew what we were doing, for the most part.
And what was the most challenging aspect of your AIT?
Night driving.
What was that?
In the Humvee, we learned it's a thermal screen that comes down, and your vision is basically about this wide. That's your field of view. So you really and you have no depth perception, so you don't have concepts of on the sides or in
And
front of you.
why is your field of vision so small?
Because that's how big the screen is.
And did you find AIT more or less restricted than basic training?
About the same.
About the same. Did you, how did you communicate with your family?
Through correspondence.
Just letters?
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to communicate more?
Nope. Same.
And when did you complete your AIT?
December 11th, 2008.
And after that, what did you do?
I had 10 days of leave, so I went home, came back here, kind of hung out, and then I got on a plane and flew to Korea.
And what was waiting for you in Korea?
My unit.
And what was your unit doing in Korea?
All units in Korea are there on standby just in case the North crosses over into the South.
And where were you specifically stationed?
I was at a place called Camp Hovey, South Korea. It's about 10 miles from the DMZ.
From the where?
DMZ, the demilitarized zone, the border between North and South Korea.
And what was your reaction when you found out that you were going to Korea?
Excited.
Why were you excited?
Because I got to travel.
Was travel something that drew you to a career in the military?
Partially.
And then what was your reaction when you first arrived in Korea to the country?
Kind of lost because they just kind of all right, you're here, get off. And then they pointed us down a corridor to where we were supposed to check in. And so we all got off and we moved into the corridor to where we were supposed to check in, and then they put us on a bus to where we were supposed to end process.
And what were your first impressions of the landscape of the country?
I thought it looked like New Jersey.
Why do you say that?
Because it looked like New Jersey, like the landscape.
And did you ever have any interactions with the people?
All the time.
How were they like?
Ambivalent.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think they were ambivalent?
They really didn't care one way or another if we were there or not. So.
And what was the environment like on base?
Relaxed.
More relaxed than your basic and your AIT?
Oh, way more.
How so?
We were allowed to have phones, TV, video games. We were allowed to go out whenever we wanted if we weren't at work, so.
Did you take advantage of those opportunities?
All the time.
What was your favorite way to let off steam on base?
On base?
Yep.
There was a restaurant down the road from the barracks, restaurant and bar that me and my platoon would always go to.
Do you remember what it was called?
The Iron Triangle.
Appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And were you able, because you were participated in sports at a young age, did you follow like professional sports?
Yeah, but if you really wanted to watch professional sports, you had to be up at like 2 in the morning to be able to watch it, because that's when it aired in Korea.
Did you at least keep up with it at all? No.
Not really.
And what did leadership look like in Korea?
What do you mean?
Like your leaders, how were they?
Some good, some bad.
Could you describe the good?
The good were more than willing to teach you how to do things, the proper way to do things, a better way to do things, and they're patient with you. So like they knew you were gonna screw up, so they were pretty patient with that stuff. And they were more than willing to teach you the proper way.
And what made the bad ones bad?
They didn't know what they were doing. Incompetence.
How does having an incompetent leader affect the men underneath him?
Morale. We're like, I don't trust this guy, and I think he's an idiot. And so you really didn't want to do what he said. Like, we would do what he said because he outranked us, but other than that, we really wouldn't, like, deal with it.
What did you enjoy most about your time spent in Korea?
Being able to travel around the country.
And where all were you able to go?
From the DMZ all the way down to a place called, what was that place called? Uijeonbu, which is south of Seoul. About an hour south of Seoul. So pretty much the whole country except for the very far tip.
And what was your favorite thing that you were able to do while you were traveling the country there?
Just being on the train and meeting new people and stuff like that.
And what was your least favorite aspect of being over there?
We'd spend months out in the field doing training exercises. So I think my whole year there, I spent 4.5 months out in the field. So in that aspects, we were kind of like sequestered off, and for a lot of the time, we were living out of our trucks, basically. So.
And what exactly were the dates of your time in Korea then?
January 3rd, 2010 to January 2nd, 2011. No, I take that back. January 3rd, 2009 to January 3rd, 2010.
And how did you communicate with your friends and family back home during that time?
Email, phone.
And did you often receive correspondence from back home?
Mm-hmm. Whenever I wanted to talk to them.
And what was it like being so far away this time from them?
The time difference, you had to schedule, you had to do the math and think, oh, they're 14 hours behind me, so you kind of had to schedule your phone calls because, when it was convenient for me to, if it was, right after work at 5 o'clock, it'd be, 3 in the morning back home, so.
When you returned home from Korea, what was it like?
It was good. It was really good to actually see my family face to face and be able to see my friends face to face.
So not being able to see them was hard.
Yeah.
And did you find that your time in Korea kind of changed your view on the world at all?
No, not really.
And how much time elapsed between your deployment in Korea to your deployment to Iraq?
Between Korea and Iraq, 10 months.
And what did you do during that time?
I got stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was there doing training and working. Because a normal Army day is a 9 to 5, just like anybody else.
And what were your feelings when you first received the news that you were going to deploy to Iraq?
Good, because I wanted to deploy. It's why I joined the Army.
Really?
Yes.
And how did your family and your friends react?
They were worried.
And did that affect you at all?
No.
And what were you most nervous about before your deployment?
Nothing, really.
And when and where were you deployed to?
I was deployed to Baghdad, Iraq. We got there November 10th, 2010.
And how did you train for your deployment?
We went to Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and we did force-on-force training missions for a month.
Could you describe what a force-on-force training mission looked like?
We would run maneuvers, and there would be actual, like, they'd hire actors or other people. There's a unit there called the opposition force, and they play the enemy, and basically they'll coordinate attacks against us, and we'll have to repel them or do whatever.
Did you find that training helped you when you went over to Iraq?
Yes.
And did you ever receive any training in the culture of the Iraq and its people?
No.
And when you got off the plane, what was your first impression of Iraq?
It's hot.
The heat.
Yeah.
And what about the heat? Like, what did it feel like?
Like walking into a blow dryer.
And what about the sights?
Where we landed initially, there wasn't any sights. It was flat and sandy.
And did it smell any different?
Where we were, no. Well, where we first landed, no.
And then what was all the sand like?
It's hard to say, really, because it's just like where we initially got, it was just completely flat. So it just looked like a big gravel parking lot.
During your deployment, did you ever interact with the Iraqi people?
All the time.
And how is that different to interacting with the Koreans?
The Koreans are, how do I say this? The Koreans keep to themselves, pretty much. I mean, they have no concept of personal space, but it's because you have a third of their country living in one city, so it's kind of, you can't help it. Whereas in Iraq, you don't really have that issue, and they still have no concept of personal space.
Why don't you think they have any concept of personal space?
Because they would literally stand this close to you when they were talking to you. Or they'd always be, like, hanging off of you and stuff. So you'd have to be constantly, dude, get away from me.
How did you feel about that?
Annoyed. Really, like, I didn't mind talking to them. And so a lot of them were pretty cool, but like I didn't mind talking to them, but you just kind of had to remind them that you're like, don't touch me.
And were there any really large cultural differences that you didn't really know prior to your deployment that you kind of picked up on while you were there between the Americans and the Iraqi people?
No. In general, the Iraqi people kept your general populace were they were ambivalent to us too. Because we'd been there for so long, they were just like, oh, it's another American convoy, and they go on about their business. So.
And in the pre-interview, you were asked if your training in Korea prepared you for your situation in Iraq.
Different styles of warfare.
And you replied, you used a lot of the same skills, but not the same tactics.
Correct.
What skills were you referring to?
Basic rifle marksmanship. Very, very basic maneuvering type skills, driving, stuff like that. But as far as your tactics go, Korea is geared toward mountain warfare, whereas Iraq is not.
What kind of warfare, then, did you experience in Iraq?
Desert. More flat, more anticipating, or it's more like trying to spot like IEDs and where the enemy might be and stuff like that. So.
And could you describe some of the desert warfare tactics?
No.
Could you describe a day of your deployment and what that looked like?
We'd get up at around 4 in the morning, get our trucks ready to go, and then we'd go pull guard for overwatching some area, and we would come back, and then we would have time to we'd have like a half hour to eat, and brush your teeth, and do that sort of thing, and then we would gear up to go out on a mission for that day.
So is your guard duty inside the wire or outside the wire?
Out.
So did you find yourself spending a lot of your deployment outside the wire?
Yes.
And how did you feel about that?
It didn't really bother me.
And were your missions that you were going on dangerous?
Yes.
How so?
Well, my platoon was in charge of security for our squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel, and he would go to meetings with officials, sensitive or pro-American officials and stuff like that, and we were always out on the road, so your chance for IEDs or EFPs or anything like that was increased.
And how was dealing with the heightened stress of knowing that you always had to be on alert?
We didn't have time to think about it. We were just going, go all the time.
And how did you feel during combat? Did you ever experience combat?
We saw explosions and stuff like that, but we were never directly shot at or anything like that. We got mortared on our base sometimes, but that was more of an annoyance than anything.
And do you feel as though your training prepared you?
For the most part, yeah.
For the most part, but not the whole part. Could you elaborate?
Some of the stuff you can't train for, so you just kind of expect the unexpected, I guess you'd say.
What kind of things can't you train for?
Mortars, rocket attacks, IEDs, stuff like that.
So how do you respond to them when they do happen?
It's hard to say, really, because when it does happen, certain training kicks in. So, we've been told and we've trained, when this happens, you do this. So that kicks in.
While you were overseas, were you able to communicate a lot with home?
Mm-hmm.
And what forms of communication did you utilize?
Skype.
And how was having that versus your time in Korea when you may not have had that?
It was, our communication was limited. You couldn't talk to people as much. So, but other than that, no real difference.
How often did you get to talk to your family back home?
I'm not sure. Probably once a week or once every 10 days or something like that.
And what sort of activities did you do to kind of let off steam during your deployment?
We didn't have time.
Didn't have time?
Nope.
How was your connection with your fellow soldiers in Iraq?
Good. My platoon was pretty close.
And how important is that connection?
Really important, because you have to be able to trust those guys with your life. And they have to be able to trust you. So.
And who were you closest with in your unit?
Probably my squad leader.
And what was his name?
Michael Namath.
And what made you develop a bond with him?
He lived next door to me in the barracks when we were at Fort Riley, Kansas, so we'd go out drinking together and stuff like that. And so we had become friends before that, so when we got to Iraq, we were already in the same platoon together, so we just kind of knew each other and trusted each other enough to, so we just hung out together when we could.
Do you still communicate with him?
Yep.
And how has that bond grown since you are now a veteran, or has it gone down at all?
It's different because we live in different states, and he's out now too, so we have responsibilities in that nature, like we have jobs and stuff like that to worry about. So.
And during your deployment, how were your leaders?
Good. Real good.
And what qualities made them good leaders?
They knew what they were doing.
It seems to be a common theme.
Yes.
And Peter Kinswater, a military writer, made a claim that there are no atheists in the foxholes, referring to the fact that religion plays a really large part in deployment, whether or not soldiers want to acknowledge it. What did religion look like for you during deployment?
Really didn't have time to think about it.
Do you agree with Kinswater?
Hard to say. I've never been in that position before, so.
How are you feeling as the end of your deployment got closer and closer?
Excited.
And why was that?
Because I was going home to America, and I was actually going to be able to stay there for more than a few months.
Did you enjoy your time spent during your deployment?
That's a tough question to ask, because did I enjoy it? I mean, I was working, so as much as you can, I guess, enjoy work. So.
And what was the first thing you did when you got home?
Ate.
Do you happen to remember what you ate?
I had a steak and potatoes.
What had
beer.
What had your food looked like while you were serving your deployment?
For the most part, it was just Army food. So, and everything had to be shipped over anyway, so it was all either reconstituted or freeze-dried or stuff like that. I mean, for the most part, it was pretty good, but it was pretty good, but it got to be really repetitive, so it was the same thing over and over and over again, so you just got kind of tired of it.
And how did you feel when you returned home?
Happy. I think I was more excited about the fact that I was almost out, so.
And did you find that you had changed after your deployment in Iraq when you returned home?
Not right after I returned home, no.
When did you start to notice a change?
A few months. I got back in November, so probably about February of the next year.
And what changes did you start to notice?
More along the lines of, like, what I had gotten used to in the military. What your expectations of people are in the military can't be what you have for civilian people.
Could you give some examples?
Like, if I was told to do something, or I told somebody else to do something, they would do it. They would do it right there, without discussion. And in the civilian world, you have a whole lot of there'd be discussion or argument or people just not doing it, and that got frustrating and angering.
How did you handle that?
Initially pretty poorly. I got mad at some people and probably said some stuff I shouldn't have, but.
And have you changed since then?
Yeah, it's calmed down a lot.
And after your service overseas, do you have any opinion on what America is doing in the Middle East?
In the Middle East in general? As far as like how we did Iraq, I think certain things could have been handled better, but overall I think it was successful.
What sort of things do you think could have been handled better?
How we went about the whole, like, me and my buddies used to joke it was Vietnam in reverse, because we came in, took over the country, and then sent in advisors. And I think that we should have either stayed there longer in a more combat-oriented role, or we should have gone in, taken care of Saddam's problem, and then left.
And why do you think that?
Because the SOFA agreements in that situation don't work. Status of forces agreements don't work because it limits what we were able to do, because it was turning over power to the Iraqi people, which tied our hands in a lot of situations, which sometimes got to be very, very frustrating.
Could you give an example of a situation in which your hands were tied?
We technically weren't allowed to do patrols without a Iraqi escort, either military or police.
And were you always able to get an escort?
They're unreliable, at best.
So how did you guys go about coping with that?
We had an agreement where we were able to drive Humvees painted like Iraqi police Humvees.
Now I'd like to go forward to when you returned home. What kind of debriefing did you experience right when you got home?
Normal, like every quarter in the military you go through safety stand-down classes and stuff like that, so we basically got those classes like as soon as we got back, like don't kick your dog, don't beat your wife, don't become an alcoholic, don't do drugs, don't commit suicide, that type of stuff. And they gave us like the information, like if we were having problems with things, who to contact and stuff like that.
Did you ever find yourself having any problems upon your return home?
Yeah, depression and anxiety.
Would you mind talking about that a little bit more?
Nope. A lot of it was that after deployment, I went from a period of very, very high activity to almost no activity. So a lot of it came from just having tons of time on my hand, and everything that I had just done for the entire year was able to catch up to me. So it just all kind of hit me at once, so I kind of felt overwhelmed, which added to the anxiety and stuff like that.
And how were you able to cope with the overwhelming anxiety you were feeling?
Medication. And just kind of dealing with it, I guess you'd say.
And how did you deal with it?
Ignored it. Sometimes I wouldn't handle it very well, and like I said, when I got back, I had a shorter temper, so.
And have you found yourself able, since then, that feeling to move forward?
Yes. It's much less severe now, so. And the VA helps out a lot with stuff along those lines, so.
How does the VA help you?
They provide medical attention, and I'm able to get my medication through them, too, so.
And right after you returned home, what were you doing?
What was I doing right after I returned home? Like when I was still in the military?
Yes.
Whole lot of nothing, basically. We'd have classes and stuff that we would have to go to for debriefing. We took a test for traumatic brain injury. We took a physical. We had blood drawn. We got vaccinated. And we started a process called ACAP, which basically helps you to transition back into civilian life.
Did you find ACAP effective for you?
Yes.
And what sort of activities or things did they do to help you transition back?
There are briefings on what the VA benefits were and how you make a claim and how you go about doing certain things. And they had like a resume writing class, and they had like job fairs, and they some other career-oriented classes, how to apply to college and stuff like that. Stuff that I had already done before, but I can definitely see how it would help people who had never gone through it.
And where were you stationed when all of this was going on?
I went back to Fort Riley.
And how long after your return from Iraq was there between the end of your military career?
I got out. Three months.
And what was the reason for you ending your service with the military after that time?
It was just time to move on to something different, something else.
In the pre-interview, you mentioned you were promised some things that did not come to fruition after your deployment that you were promised prior to your deployment. Are you able to talk about those?
There were opportunities. They said like you would have to go to like certain schools, like Airborne School or Pathfinder School or Ranger School or things along those lines, which I would have gladly done. And they said they'd be available, and when I got back, they weren't. So that kind of was like, yep, I'm definitely getting out now.
And what did you want to move on to after you left?
I didn't know. I just wanted out.
When those schools and those programs were not available, how did you feel?
It just sort of cemented my decision to get out of the Army.
Did it have any effect on your views of the military?
Nope.
Now, over the past few years, the Army's been going through some major changes, including the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in September 2011. Did you have any interactions with soldiers who identified openly as gay or lesbian?
No. But there were guys we knew were gay, and they knew we knew, but it was never an open thing. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was to protect gay people. It wasn't to keep gay people out of the military.
And how do you find that those soldiers who everyone knew identified as gay were treated?
We didn't care as long as he was able to do his job.
Do you think it was a smart move for the military to make to repeal it?
I think it was more of a dog and pony show myself.
Could you describe what you mean by that?
I think it was all for show, political maneuvering.
And you received the Army Commendation Medal for services in Iraq. How did it feel when you were able to earn that?
Good, because at that point I knew my deployment was over.
And did you enjoy your time in the Army?
I did.
What did you enjoy most about it?
The loyalty between me and the guys that in my platoon and the guys I was with.
What was the worst part of your time?
Basic training.
And currently, right now, what are you doing?
I live and work in Indianapolis.
What are you doing for a job?
Just odd jobs.
And what are your plans for the future?
Finish my degree.
And you're getting your degree in history?
Yes.
And what do you want to do with your history degree?
Get another federal job, civilian federal job.
And what possible career opportunities are there?
FBI, CIA, NSA.
And what would you want to do if you worked for the FBI or the CIA?
Analyst.
And what exactly would an analyst do?
You would be given intelligence briefings, or you'd be given information. You'd write a paper up on it, I guess you'd say, and then you would present it to your superiors.
And what interests you most about that field?
Research.
Could you ever see yourself re-entering the military?
No.
Why?
Because the direction the Army is going.
And what direction is that?
They're drawing down.
What does that mean?
They're becoming more of a garrison army, which means no more deployments, none of that. So it'd be a lot of time on base, a lot of time, just in garrison, a lot more rules and regulations, and it's going, in a lot of ways, in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad, but in a lot of ways it's coming back to the more prim and prop dog and pony show, so people can come in and say, look at how neat and orderly and everything is.
So you don't think that's an effective army?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I think it's effective, but it's just not for me.
Okay. What has your time with the military taught you?
What do you mean?
What lessons have you learned through your time spent with the military?
Self-reliance, confidence, leadership.
And which of these lessons do you carry with you every day?
Confidence.
Did you find that prior to your military career you lacked confidence?
Looking back, probably, yeah.
Why would you say that?
I was probably more of a timid, shy kind of kid.
And how did the Army give you more confidence?
Well, just sort of the accomplishments that I was able to achieve, and knowing that hardly anybody else is able to do what I did.
Now, before we close, is there anything else you believe that we should know about your life in military service?
Not my life, but a point of fact was that I belonged to, our brigade it wasn't actually reflagged, but we were renamed. We were no longer a heavy brigade combat team. We were an advise and assist brigade.
And was it simply a name change?
No, our mission changed too. We had, what were they called? They were called MIT teams, and I don't remember what that stands for, but they were advisors attached to us, mainly higher-ranking officers that would advise their officers.
And what units did you belong to during your time with the military?
In Korea, I belonged to the 4th Squadron, 7th Cavalry, for the 2nd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division. And in Fort Riley, I belonged to the 5th Squadron, 4th Cavalry, 2nd Brigade, 2nd Advisor 6th Brigade, 1st Infantry Division.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Nope, that's it.
Specialist Johnson, on behalf of myself, the Cantigny First Division Oral History Project, and our fellow citizens, I want to thank you for your service to our nation and for taking part in this interview today.
It was my honor.